You think being kind makes you a good person. You think treating people well, giving them the benefit of the doubt, helping when you can, that this is how you're supposed to live. And maybe it is. But here's what nobody tells you, what Schopenhauer spent his entire life trying to warn people about. Kindness in a world full of predators makes you prey. Your empathy becomes a weakness that others exploit. Your generosity becomes an invitation for parasites. Your willingness to see the good in people becomes the blind spot through which they destroy you. Kind men don't just suffer occasionally. They suffer first, they suffer most, and they suffer longest because the very qualities that make them kind are the qualities that make them vulnerable. And the world, Schopenhauer understood, is not set up to reward virtue. It's set up to punish naivety. Let's start with Schopenhauer's fundamental view of human nature and reality. Unlike optimistic philosophers who believed humans are essentially good, or that the universe bends toward justice, Schopenhauer saw reality as fundamentally characterized by suffering, conflict, and the blind striving of will. He believed that beneath all the civilized behavior and moral posturing, humans are driven by an irrational, insatiable will to survive and dominate. We're not rational creatures who occasionally act on emotion. We're fundamentally irrational creatures driven by unconscious forces. And reason is just a thin veneer we use to justify what we were going to do anyway. In this worldview, kindness is an anomaly. It goes against the fundamental nature of existence, which is competition for scarce resources. When you're kind, when you prioritize someone else's well-being over your own advantage, you're acting contrary to the basic logic of survival. You're making yourself weaker in a world that rewards strength. You're making yourself vulnerable in a world full of people looking for vulnerability to exploit. Schopenhauer didn't say this to be cruel or cynical. He said it because he observed it. He watched kind people get destroyed over and over while ruthless people thrived, and he wanted to understand why. The answer is that kind men operate according to a different moral framework than most people. They have what Schopenhauer called compassion, the ability to feel another person's suffering as if it were their own. This isn't just sympathy or pity. It's a genuine breakdown of the barrier between self and other. When a compassionate person sees someone in pain, they feel that pain. When they see someone in need, they feel compelled to help. This is a rare quality, and Schopenhauer believed it was the only true foundation for genuine morality. But it's also incredibly dangerous in a world where most people don't share it. Because here's what happens. The kind man encounters someone in distress. Maybe it's a woman with a sob story about her terrible ex. Maybe it's a friend who needs money. Maybe it's a co-worker who needs help with their project. The kind man, operating from genuine compassion, helps. He doesn't calculate whether this person deserves help. He doesn't demand proof of their story. He doesn't protect himself first and help second. He just helps because that's who he is. His compassion doesn't allow him to witness suffering without responding. But the person he's helping, more often than not, doesn't share his moral framework. They're not compassionate, they're opportunistic. They saw his kindness and recognized it as weakness. They saw his willingness to help and recognized it as an opening for exploitation. So they take what he offers, and then they come back for more. And more. And more. Because the kind man has taught them that he's an available resource, someone whose boundaries are porous, someone whose compassion can be weaponized against him. He suffers because his virtue makes him visible to predators. Schopenhauer observed this pattern constantly in relationships between men and women. He was notoriously pessimistic about romantic love, viewing it as a biological trap where men's kindness and romantic idealism made them vulnerable to manipulation. The kind man meets a woman, and his compassion, combined with sexual attraction, makes him see her through a distorted lens. He wants to believe she's special, different, worthy of his devotion. So he gives, he sacrifices, he accommodates, he prioritizes her needs over his own. And because he's kind, he doesn't even see this as a transaction. He does it because that's what love means to him. But she, operating from a fundamentally different framework, sees his kindness as weakness. She doesn't respect the sacrifice because she never asked him to make it. She interprets his accommodation as lack of strength rather than expression of love. She escalates her demands, testing to see how much she can take before he finally pushes back. And when he does push back, when he finally sets a boundary or says no, she's outraged. Not because he's being unreasonable, but because he trained her to expect unlimited access to his resources, and now he's changing the rules. His kindness created the conditions for his own suffering. Schopenhauer would say this isn't the woman's fault. Not really. She's just acting according to her nature, according to the fundamental will to survive and secure resources that drives all living things. The fault, if there is one, lies with the kind man for not understanding that his compassion is a rare quality, not a universal one. He projected his own moral framework onto others, assumed they operated according to the same principles he does, and paid the price for his naivety. He suffered first because he was the first to be vulnerable. He suffered most because his compassion made him unable to cut off the source of his suffering. And he suffered longest because even after being exploited, his nature makes him want to give people another chance. This same pattern plays out in friendships. The kind man has friends who only call when they need something, friends who take and never give back, friends who expect him to be available for their problems but are mysteriously busy when he needs support. And he tolerates it because his compassion makes him see their struggles, makes him want to help, makes him unable to simply cut people off, even when they're clearly using him. He tells himself they're going through a hard time. They'll reciprocate when they can, they don't mean to be selfish. But the reality is, they're not friends. They're parasites, and his kindness is what allows them to feed. In the workplace, kind men suffer in different but equally predictable ways. They take on extra work to help colleagues. They don't advocate aggressively for their own advancement because that feels selfish. They give credit to others, even when they did most of the work. They assume merit will be recognized and rewarded. But in most work environments, especially corporate ones, kindness reads as lack of ambition. Willingness to help reads as having extra capacity that can be exploited. Not self-promoting reads as not having anything worth promoting. The kind man works harder, produces more, helps everyone around him, and watches less competent but more ruthless people get promoted over him because they understood the game he refused to play. Schopenhauer believed that suffering is the fundamental nature of existence. All life is suffering because all life is driven by unsatisfiable will. We're always wanting, always lacking, always striving for something we don't have. And when we get it, we immediately want something else. But kind men suffer more than others because their compassion makes them take on additional suffering voluntarily. They don't just feel their own pain, they feel everyone else's pain too. And unlike other people who can witness suffering and remain unmoved, the kind man is constitutionally incapable of turning away. His empathy is his burden. The truly dark part of Schopenhauer's insight is that the world not only fails to reward kindness, it actively punishes it. In a system based on competition for scarce resources, the person who prioritizes others over themselves loses by definition. The person who shares when others hoard ends up with less. The person who tells the truth when others lie gets outmaneuvered. The person who fights fair when others cheat gets destroyed. Kindness is a handicap in a ruthless system, and modern society, for all its talk about values and morality, is fundamentally a ruthless system. The people at the top aren't there because they're the kindest. They're there because they're the most willing to do whatever it takes to win. So what's the solution? Schopenhauer didn't believe in becoming cruel or abandoning compassion. He thought compassion was precious precisely because it was rare and because it went against the grain of existence. But he also believed in recognizing reality clearly. If you're going to be kind, you need to do it with eyes open. You need to understand that most people will not reciprocate, will not appreciate, will not even understand what you're doing. You need to accept that your kindness will be exploited, that parasites will find you, that you will suffer for your virtue. And you need to decide consciously whether that's a price you're willing to pay. This means developing discernment. Not everyone deserves your kindness. Schopenhauer would say you should reserve your compassion for those who are genuinely suffering through no fault of their own, who aren't trying to manipulate you, who would help you if positions were reversed. But you should become ruthless about cutting off people who are clearly exploiting your good nature. The friend who only takes, cut them off. The woman who treats your kindness as weakness, walk away. The co-worker who steals credit for your work, Stop helping them. This isn't cruelty, this is basic self-preservation. It also means understanding that being kind doesn't obligate you to be stupid. You can have compassion for someone while still maintaining firm boundaries. You can want to help while still protecting yourself first. You can see someone suffering while still recognizing that helping them might enable destructive behavior or drain resources you need for your own survival. Kindness without wisdom is just martyrdom. And Schopenhauer had no respect for martyrs. He thought voluntary suffering was idiotic unless it served some greater purpose. The kind man also needs to accept that he will be misunderstood. People who operate from selfish frameworks literally cannot comprehend acting from genuine compassion. They'll assume you have hidden motives. They'll think you're weak or naive. They'll interpret your kindness as some kind of manipulation attempt. This is projection. They're telling you how they would operate in your position, but you can't control their interpretation. You can only control whether you let their misunderstanding change how you behave. Schopenhauer believed that the highest form of life was the life that recognized the suffering inherent in existence and responded with compassion anyway. Not because compassion eliminates suffering, but because it at least acknowledges the fundamental unity of all suffering beings. When you're truly compassionate, you recognize that the barrier between yourself and others is illusory. Their suffering is your suffering. Their joy is your joy. This is a profound philosophical and even spiritual insight, but in practical terms, in day-to-day existence, it makes you vulnerable. So you have to make a choice. You can become hard, protective, ruthless, prioritizing your own survival and advantage above all else. This will reduce your suffering. You won't be exploited as much, you won't be taken advantage of, you won't feel the weight of other people's pain. But you also won't be fully human in the way Schopenhauer understood humanity at its best. You'll survive, but you'll survive as something lesser than you could be. You'll be another will-driven animal competing for resources, indistinguishable from all the other will-driven animals, except in your level of success. Or you can remain kind, remain compassionate, continue to act from genuine care for others. But if you make this choice, you have to do it consciously, understanding that you're choosing a harder path. You have to accept that you will suffer for it. You have to develop the wisdom to direct your compassion toward people and causes worthy of it, rather than letting it be exploited by parasites. You have to maintain boundaries even while feeling empathy. You have to be strategic even while being genuine. This is incredibly difficult. Most people who try to be kind end up being doormats because they lack the wisdom to distinguish between compassion and enabling, between helping and being exploited. Schopenhauer's warning is clear. Kind men suffer first because kindness in a ruthless world is vulnerability. The compassionate person feels pain that others ignore. The generous person gives resources that others hoard. The trusting person gets betrayed by those who understand trust as opportunity. This isn't fair. It isn't just. But fairness and justice are human concepts that we project onto a universe that operates according to different principles. The universe rewards effectiveness, not virtue. It rewards adaptation, not morality. The kind man is poorly adapted to survive in a competitive system, which is why he suffers. But here's the paradox that Schopenhauer also understood. Even though kind men suffer, even though compassion creates vulnerability, even though the world punishes virtue, kindness is still the only thing that makes life meaningful. Without compassion, existence is just blind will, struggling against blind will, suffering without purpose, competition without meaning. The kind man suffers, but his suffering has dignity, because it comes from a conscious choice to act against his own narrow self-interest. He's not just a biological machine optimizing for survival. He's a human being, living according to values that transcend mere existence. So Schopenhauer's message isn't to stop being kind. It's to be kind wisely. Understand what you're doing and why. Accept that you'll pay a price for it. Develop the discernment to direct your compassion toward worthy recipients rather than letting it be exploited. Maintain boundaries even while feeling empathy. Be strategic even while being genuine. And most importantly, don't expect the world to reward you for your kindness. Do it because it aligns with your values, because it's how you choose to respond to the suffering inherent in existence, because it's what makes you human rather than just another animal competing for resources. The kind man will always suffer first, that's not going to change. The question is whether he suffers meaningfully, with wisdom and boundaries and conscious choice, or whether he suffers senselessly, exploited by parasites, martyred for no reason, destroyed by the very qualities that make him good. Schopenhauer spent his life trying to help people suffer wisely. He understood that suffering is inevitable, but meaningless suffering is tragedy. The kind man who understands reality, who protects himself while still acting from compassion, who maintains his values without being naive about human nature, that man can suffer and still win. Not by avoiding pain, but by ensuring that his pain serves something beyond mere survival. That's the warning and that's the wisdom. Kind men suffer first, but wise kind men suffer with purpose.